Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Champions of Self podcast. I'm Ben Eden, your host, and I'm happy to welcome today Ada Lloyd. Ada, how are you today?
I'm absolutely terrific. I'm delighted to be here, Ben.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Ada, why don't we get started by you telling us who you are and what you do?
Sounds good. So I need to start with a story that goes back many, many years because I'm an antique. What can I say? But when I was a 12-year-old young woman, I was standing on a subway platform in New York City, listening to the clank of the approaching subway, and I was considering jumping. I was in so much pain because I had been being sexually abused by my father. And at the time, nobody talked about that. And I was just desperate to find a way to stop the pain. And that seemed like a good alternative. Well, obviously, I chose not to take that alternative, for which I'm grateful. But fast forward, the first thing I did is I figured out a socially acceptable way to run away and got myself on a college campus 1 month after my 16th birthday, 2,500 miles from home. And that took care of the physical safety, but it didn't deal with all of the emotional stuff. It was all hidden behind a veneer of competence and capability. And I was a mess. What that's the bottom line. And a few years later, I had a life-altering epiphany. It said, "You're not responsible for your father's choices, but you are responsible for how you allow them to impact your life."
Ooh.
Well, at that time, there still were not options. There was nobody talking about the sexual abuse of children or a whole lot of other things that we talk about today that create stress and angst. And so what I did was I started delving into the self-help arena and the personal development arena. And I would find a puzzle piece and I'd say, sounds like this might work. So I would hold on to it. And if it did, I would keep it. And I'd find another puzzle piece and I'd say, oh, let's try this one. No, it's not working. Let's toss it. So gradually I gathered together puzzle pieces. They didn't fit together, but I gathered together puzzle pieces that were helping me deal with the issues that I had. And then I wound up building bridges, between those puzzle pieces to make things fit together so they worked for me. Well, fast forward a few more years, and the sexual abuse of children was just barely starting to hit the public radar. And I was asked to speak about dealing with stress because I was a single mom, I had a business. The perception was that I dealt with stress better than most people did. And so as I talked, the first thing I said is, look, we've all got stress in our lives. There's the guy that flips you off on the freeway. There's the mouthy teenager. There's, the parent that's a pain in the you-know-what. Whatever it is that creates stress for us on a daily basis. But there's also uncommon stresses that happen in our lives. Things like divorce or delinquency or addiction. And I listed a half a dozen, including being sexually abused as a child. And the ones that I listed, I went on to say, I have experienced all of these. And these are the strategies that I have found have helped me deal with them. So I just dropped a little breadcrumb about abuse. That's all I said. Afterwards, I had 4 women come up to me about my age at the time. And 3 of them put their arms around me and cried on my shoulder and said, I thought I was the only one. The 4th one just cried and cried and cried and couldn't say anything. But I knew and she knew that I knew. And that was the day I understood that I had a responsibility to reach back to people who were not as far down the path as I was, that really didn't even know hope and healing was possible at that point, and share with them what I knew. And so I began to do that on a pro bono basis while I continued to raise teenagers and run a business and, keep all of the assorted balls, trying to juggle them with nothing hitting the ground. And fast forward some more years and the economy went in a not very good direction in the mid-2000s, and it impacted my business. And I had a large client that filed bankruptcy, and I said, okay, it's time for me to get out of here. But before I start something else, and I had continued to progress over the years, and I had done a little bit of therapy and some other things and found pieces here and there. But I said, before I do anything else, I need to really figure out my third act, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I need to know who I am and what I want. And so I took some time, and that's when I created the 7 pillars of a happy and successful life. And those pillars are personal, our relationship with ourselves, physical, everything about our bodies, our health, emotional, which is largely about our resiliency and how we handle the unexpected, like COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
Spiritual, however an individual defines spiritual. Professional, whatever it is that somebody does to bring money into the household. Financial, about that financial stability. And relationships of all different kinds. And then the key was to say, okay, these are the 7 crucial areas of life. So how does success look like to me in each of these areas? Not what society says, not what mom and dad said, but to me, to Ada Lloyd. And, society says success is things like a big house and a fancy car and exotic vacations and a healthy stock portfolio. And we've got the influencers that are all over the internet telling us what success looks like. But what matters is knowing what success looks like to you. And once you know what it looks like to you in each of those areas, you can then weave that together and create your unique definition of success. This is such a crucial piece in creating the life that you want to have, because it becomes a foundation. If you were going to build your dream house and you knew what you wanted your bedroom to look like, and it was going to be on the 2nd floor of your dream house, would you start building that bedroom on the 2nd floor? Of course not. It would crash. There's nothing to support it. You need a foundation, you need a 1st floor. So having that unique definition of success allows you to begin building the life that you want to have that's going to take you where you want to go. One of the stories that Stephen Covey would talk about years ago was having your ladder of success leaning against the right building.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't want to get to the top of the ladder and find out that, you were leaning against the wrong building. Because all of us know people who by the world standards look successful, and yet they're not happy. And that's because they've climbed the ladder of success leaning against the wrong building. It wasn't their building.
Right.
So the foundation allows you to build on, your foundation, your building. When you get to that top of that ladder of success, it's going to be what you want. And so part of it is about using that and using it to set goals, to create a vision for your life, and then reverse engineering and going out 10 years, backing it down and backing it all the way down to what you're going to do today. And, a process for that. But here's the other thing that is really cool when you have that unique definition of success, is you can use it as a mindful filter to know when to say no and when to say yes. Because so often we're overwhelmed because we have said yes to too many opportunities and too many people about too many things.
Mm.
And what winds up getting procrastinated is what's most important to us, because we're honorable people and we're going to keep our commitments to other people. So when you know your unique definition of success, it puts you in a position to know when to say no gracefully and in a supportive way, and when to say yes to those things that are in alignment. And it's an oversimplification in ways. We're, kind of rolling through all of this pretty quick. But what that does is that lifts the burden of overwhelm. And that makes procrastination in many ways just simply disappear. Because the ultimate freedom we have in this world is the freedom to change.
Mm. Very good. No, some good stuff. My goodness. Some people who listen to this podcast, and this had nothing to do with what you just did, Ada, this is all my fault, but sometimes the way I introduce podcasts, we just get right into it. So, and that's what we did today. So this is awesome. So then what we do is we just break it down a little bit. Now, I thought of some neat things that you had said. One was that you are not responsible for your father's actions, but you are responsible for how they affect you, right?
And what I do with it,
There you go.
you know?
And then the other comment, and then we'll connect the two and we'll talk about it, is that this idea of saying no to things, right? We can say no to certain emotions too, not invalidating them or not allowing them to have their place, but we can say, I'm not going to let you take control of my life or stay with me longer than necessary, right? What are some things that you learned linking the two of those to give you the freedom and the success that you have today?
I think probably a couple of things, Ben. One is that we frequently don't get to choose our circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
We always get to choose our response to those circumstances and our attitudes. So that, that was the essence of what, that epiphany really started to teach me. Now, fast forward many years, as an example, there's a woman that I know whose husband died unexpectedly 17 years ago. Almost every, well, maybe not every sentence, every paragraph that comes out of her mouth starts with, if only George hadn't died.
Mm.
And so what happens is we have the right and the obligation to feel our emotions,
Mm-hmm.
those negative things, those challenging things. But we also have an obligation to say, okay, what am I going to learn from them?
Right.
How am I going to allow the bad stuff to serve me to make something good come from it? We don't have the right to live there. Because when we live there, what we do is, in a lot of ways, our society today tends to celebrate victimization.
Mm-hmm.
You are a victim of XYZ, therefore you can't do ABC or whatever. And so what happens when we buy into that mentality of victimization, let's say that you were abused, verbally, physically, bullied in school, whatever. When you buy into that identity as a victim of bullying or abuse or whatever, you are essentially giving up your power to be who you want to be and allowing that bully to continue to abuse you. And in the process, you're abusing yourself because you're holding on to that, you're living there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, process it, do what you need to do. There's all sorts of strategies that, are available to move beyond it. But then, okay, did it teach you empathy? Did it teach you the importance of respecting people who are different than you? What are the things that can be taken from it and used to benefit yourself in your life and to benefit other people?
Right. Yeah, and the two places, let's say, that people were coming from that I wanted to bring out, two perspectives. One type of person listening might be in a place where they had no idea that there was a possibility of moving on from their emotional pain. They didn't know they had the choice, right? Then there might be another group of people that says, kind of what you were saying, in the victimization place, where they say, sure, there is a choice, but I don't believe there's a choice for me because it was so bad, or this defines me. It has defined me my whole life. It's a genetic thing, or whatever they want to call it, right? But what you're saying, and what I've learned, is that we always have a choice for those things. Is that right?
Absolutely. And here's kind of an analogy I would give you, particularly for the second person, but even for the first person. If you're like me, when you were a kid, you fell off your bike and you wound up getting abrasions on your arms or your legs or whatever, and you went home and mom pulled out the peroxide and you're going, no, 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 that's going to hurt.
Right.
And she's saying, yeah, but it's only going to hurt for a few minutes. I've got to put that peroxide on so that we can get all the dirt and the bad stuff out so it doesn't fester. And yeah, it hurt, but you would see all of the white bubbles coming up. And,
Mm-hmm.
she would say, that's the bad stuff coming out. And our emotions and so much of what we deal with are the same. If we simply stuff them and pretend that they don't exist, or if we allow them to own us and become a victim of them, what we're doing is we're, forgetting the peroxide, and we're just saying, okay, dirt, okay, ugly stuff, stay in there and fester away.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't do anybody any good, least of all us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it can be a scary journey. And sometimes I'll tell people, you have to be willing to let it get worse before it's going to get better. Just like it got worse when Mom put the peroxide on my arm.
Right.
I wasn't happy. It hurt. But
Mm-hmm.
it's short-term pain for long-term gain and freedom.
I like that. And that's so good. I like how we put physical examples for the emotional, because sometimes those are easier to understand because we've seen it, or we've seen other people go through it. And it can go from any level. It can go from the scraped knee when you fall off the bike and you need to clean it with some peroxide, all the way to a broken bone or something like that.
Yeah.
But the principles are the same. You have to get it taken care of in the proper way, which may include a little bit more hurting in the moment. But like you say, the proper short-term pain will allow for long-term healing. I like that.
And it's like everything else. It's a choice. We're back to that. The ultimate freedom that we have is the freedom to choose. And so if you know who you can become, I think even people who are in a great deal of pain, there's some little nugget deep within their soul that says, I could be, I could do. But then it gets suppressed with, if only something hadn't happened, or if only I were smarter, if only I had better health insurance, if only, if only, if only. And, one of Walt Disney's quotes, and I'm going to get close but not exact, is, if you can dream it, you can achieve it.
Right.
I don't believe that anybody has a dream or a hope that's buried deep within them, no matter how hopeless it feels, that is not within their capacity to achieve. Does that mean it's going to be easy? No. Does it mean it's going to be automatic? I remember hearing years ago, so shoot for the sun, but if you miss it and you only hit the moon, is that all bad? Is that,
Mm-hmm.
um,
No, that's very good.
I can't imagine a life where I didn't want to stretch and I didn't want to grow. I think that's the ultimate adventure.
True.
And, if I have a mission, if you will, it's to help people understand that wherever they're at, there's a path to making it better.
That's
But
so
they
good.
have to choose and they have to act.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can do that for them.
One principle I wanted to ask you about, and hopefully this comes out the right way. I've heard it said, some people just look at emotions and they talk to the younger people and they say, look, emotions are just part of life and you have to get over it. Putting that back to the physical example that you mentioned, pretty much all of us have fallen off a bike and scraped our knee or some sort of injury like that. We've experienced that. Now, is it still fair to say, well, that's just part of life? Not necessarily. But here's the principle that I want to make, and then let's see what you have to say about it. Yes, even if it's true that all of us have fallen off a bike at a time and scraped our knee, the emotional side of that could be different for everybody. Some people, based on the scenario or how they were raised, fall off their bike and say, oh, okay, I know how to clean it. I'll get it clean and then I'll go back to it. Other people, maybe they were in a situation where they fell off their bike in front of their best friend or in front of somebody they were trying to impress. So now comes the emotional side that says, oh, I fell off my bike. And now it's more of an internal pain that says, I can't believe I fell off my bike in front of somebody and embarrassed myself, right? So the idea of saying, oh, it's just part of life and we have to get over it, I think that's so dangerous for a lot of people to hear. And what you and I are teaching is, if it happened, validate that it happened, learn from it, and then these tools that we share say, here's how we can break apart those emotions so you can understand them, acknowledge them, have power over them, so now you can move on from them. What are some
You know,
thoughts you have on that idea
yeah,
from your perspective?
I absolutely agree with what you're saying. And one of the things that kept coming up for me as you were talking is I think one of the most destructive words in the English language is should. And, you know, we hear you should do this. We tell ourselves, I should do that. And there is so much implied judgment in the word should. And so when we're looking at the legacy, the emotional legacy of something, or we were embarrassed or whatever, what we're essentially doing is we're saying, well, because I failed in this scenario and I was embarrassed,
Hmm.
I should avoid putting myself in a situation where I might fail again and be embarrassed again. And what that does is that's a very stultifying, you know, attitude. It makes our world smaller and smaller as we look to avoid anything where we would fail. And there's the famous Thomas Edison, you know, quote about the electric light bulb, and that he didn't fail 1,000 times. He learned 1,000 things, or no, 10,000 times. He learned 10,000 things that wouldn't work.
There you go.
And so when we have those voices and those emotions that are telling us that we shouldn't try because it's going to be a negative experience again and put us potentially in an uncomfortable arena, my thing would be to, another quote, I'm sorry, Mark Twain, I believe it is, who said, courage is not the absence of fear, it's the mastery of fear.
That's
Would be
good.
to choose to be personally courageous, to say, yes, I'm afraid I could fail again. But you know, if I do, I'll just pick myself up and move on.
Hmm.
I am the master of who I am. And I choose to be courageous in the face of the fear.
There you go. And one last principle that I wanted to make right here, and then we're going to bounce back into what you're doing and focus on the what to do about it. The reason why this emotional pain could be a part of a physical wound is because a lot of the onlookers, let's call them parents, friends, anybody with a great intention that watched the person fall off the bike, for all their good intentions, they could say, well, it is part of life to learn how to ride a bike. Sometimes you do fall down, but you just have to get through it. Them thinking that, they're trying to say, hey, it's not that big of a deal, hoping that they can then move on. However, the danger there that we've already talked about is that the hearer, the person who fell off the bike, might hear, oh, we don't care that you're embarrassed. Your feelings mean nothing. Quit being a baby, right? And that's where the emotional pain comes from. So where the onlooker says, well, I don't want them to be such a baby. They just need to learn how to be tough, yada, yada, yada. A way to still get to that point is to say, if you feel embarrassed, that's valid. I'm sorry if you do. I felt that way too. You know, I totally understand if you do. But here's the lesson that we can learn together. Even though I fell, I learned to continue and get back up and blah, blah, blah. Then the person says, oh, okay, my embarrassment was valid. I'm not a terrible person for feeling this way. They felt this way too. Now I have an ally or a connection. I can still have the courage or mastery over the fear, like you're saying, to get back on the bike and try again. Now, what a powerful life lesson that just turned into. Instead of a potential emotional pain that carries with them for years, it's now a valuable life lesson that launches them forward on how to address potential failures. So anyway, that's just a point that I wanted to make on how even flippant remarks or situations that we don't realize might turn into something so powerful could be. And my solution that I've learned from reading and from experience is we really have to just take the time to validate the emotion, and then the door will open to be able to move on to all the lessons that we wanted to teach anyway.
You know, I absolutely love that. And so often things, you know, when I talk about relationships and that, is it doesn't matter if it's a casual relationship or a significant relationship. So often problems in relationships come down to inadequate communication skills.
Mm-hmm.
And that's having somebody else perceive something different than what we think we're saying.
Right.
And, you know, our motives are all the best, but they don't necessarily hear it that way. You
Right.
know, it comes across as judgment or something else. So yeah, I love that.
Thank you. So let's learn one more thing from you. You know, you went through some things when you were younger, and you've been teaching this. You have a lot of perspective. You've been talking to a lot of people. What's another tool that you could share with people on how to use that power to choose over their emotions, right? So there's the part of understanding, there's the part of moving forward, there's the part of deciding how your circumstance is going to affect you. What's another tool you can share with us?
You know, a tool I developed years ago is what I call the yellow pad strategy. And so let's assume, you know, that you're feeling angry, but you don't know why you're feeling angry. Get out a yellow pad, and at the top of the page, why am I feeling angry? Now, the first 3, 4 things that are going to pop into your brain, they're going to feel really silly. They're going to be like, oh, come on, give me a break. Don't edit, just write. Someplace generally around number 4, 5, or 6, your brain will go, bingo, that's it. Well, at that point, just keep doing a brain dump. No editing, just write. It may be 3 pages in 15 minutes. It may be 30 pages in 3 hours. So do it in a safe place where your time frame is kind of open-ended. When you're done, you're going to be exhausted. You know, go to bed for the night, take a nap, whatever. Come back the next day or a couple of days later and look at what you have read or what you have written. It will give you a lot of insight about things you were not necessarily aware of, about, you know, why you were so angry. What happens is when you have insight and understanding, you then have the space to develop strategies to deal with it. And this is, I'm going to try to get this down to a 30-second soundbite, which is practically impossible, but let's see where this goes. I discovered this in terms of I was vulnerable to feeling rejected. I might be in a professional location. Somebody didn't say hello to me when they walked past. I'd feel rejected. I found that because I viewed my father's choices as the ultimate paternal rejection, because my mother's denial of it represented the ultimate maternal rejection, because I was now divorced, that's rejection by a spouse, and because my oldest daughter was making rotten life choices, that's the rejection of a parent's values and all of that. You think I had an issue around rejection? So once I understood that, I could develop strategies, which allowed me to step back anytime rejection started coming up and say, is this about what's happening in the moment, or is it simply triggering all of the old crap?
Ooh.
95%, it was simply triggering all of the old stuff and had nothing to do with what was going on in the moment. And so as I learned to do that, it changed the situation. And so this is the kind of thing, as you discover things, you can then develop strategies to deal with them. You can't develop strategies to deal with things you don't understand.
It's true. Great point. And it's a phrase I use often, right? I probably repeated this in the last couple episodes, but when you understand and acknowledge your emotions, you gain power over them. That's pretty much exactly what you're saying. Very
Right
good.
on, Ben.
All right, Ada, as we close, is there anything you would like to finish with before we learn how we can connect with you?
Probably the number one thing that I think can be the magic bullet for anybody is learning to keep commitments to yourself. Because we're really good at keeping commitments to other people, we're not so good at keeping commitments to ourselves. And when we don't keep commitments to ourselves, we teach ourselves that we can't trust ourselves. Can you think of a more destructive thing to do to yourself than to teach yourself that you can't trust yourself? So do the things that you need to do to put yourself in a place where you can value yourself enough to keep the commitments that you make to yourself. And when you trust yourself, your self-esteem goes up, everything gets better.
Very good. Wise words. Thank you for that. So Ada, if people want to connect with you on social media, how can they do so?
I'm on Facebook, Ada Lloyd. I've got a business page on Facebook, Ada Lloyd for Master Visions Momentum. I'm on LinkedIn as Ada Lloyd. And I've got a free ebook I would love to give anybody who's interested on the 7 pillars of a happy and successful life, because that's the foundation. And I really encourage people, whether they do it on their own, whether they want to connect with me, whatever. What is more important is they spend that time connecting with themselves to know what it is that matters most to them. And then that becomes their lodestar. That becomes the key to them knowing what their unique definition of success is and all of the good things that they want in life.
Very good. So would you prefer they reach out to you for that, or do you want me to put a link in the podcast for that? What would you think?
I gave you a link that you can put, in the podcast, either
Okay.
to email me or to just to go directly to my website and download the ebook.
Perfect. Well, we'll do that for sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Ada. Thank you for joining today, for all your words of wisdom. I hope the listeners gain some value out of this. And besides that, thank you, everybody, for joining another episode of the Champions of Self podcast. And we will talk to you next time.